So I'll just go ahead and get started with some housekeeping items. First of all, welcome, happy Monday to everyone joining us. Thank you for joining us here today for the first webinar in our Pandemic Stress First Aid series, Introduction to Mantram Repetition, which is sponsored by the USA Foundation. This series is designed to help you all manage COVID-related stress and pass these educational stress management tools onto the military caregivers that you work with. My name is Jenna Pryor. I'm the program manager at PsychArmor. I'll be your host for today's webinar, as well as your first point of contact for the webinar series moving forward. So with me today, we have PsychArmor Institute's Chief Program Officer, Dr. Carrie Rogers, and our subject matter expert, Dr. Jill Bormann. Now, before I turn it over to you all, can you just say a few words about yourself and your experience with Mantram?
I will go first, Jill, since I'm listed first on the slide and I have a lot less to say than you do. Hi, everybody. It's so great to have you here today. I am Carrie Rogers. I am the Chief Program Officer at PsychArmor and have been with PsychArmor for about 4.5 years now. I am a clinical psychologist by training and actually have known Jill for, I don't know, Jill, maybe 10 or 15 years at this point.
Probably more than 20.
Maybe 20. Okay. So Jill and I worked together at the VA. I was a clinical psychologist at the VA for 17 years before I joined the team at PsychArmor. And one of the things that I did, I ran a number of clinics and did some education for clinicians around the country. And one of the things that I learned and that I found incredibly helpful in my work, both as a clinician, but also as a person, was Mantram Repetition. And my teacher for Mantram Repetition was Jill Bormann. And so I'm super excited to be here to share with you all, Jill, and then we're going to spend some time listening to Jill and talking about Mantram, and then we will also do some Q&A at the end where I'll be working and talking with Jill on some of the stuff I've learned and in my own practice. So welcome and thank you for joining us.
Nursing. And I just want to say I'm delighted to have people here, and I really hope that you will see this presentation as something you can walk away with today and already have a practical portable tool. I first learned about Mantram probably 30 years ago. And what really struck me is that people that I worked with, they could not sit quietly and meditate. They could not, do the usual mindfulness kinds of things. But what they could do was the Mantram. So from that, I wanted to start teaching it, but there was no research. There was nothing to say that this is really evidence-based or, this is just a bunch of anecdotal stories. And so I started a career at the VA in San Diego. The year 2000, we taught our first Mantram class, and now here we are 20 years later. So we have done a lot of research, and we'll give you the contacts and things if you are interested in that. But for now, we just want to get right to the meat and potatoes of this particular presentation.
Awesome, thank you guys. So before we get started here, I just want to go over, like I said, a few housekeeping items. First, everyone should have received an email this morning with a few links. One of the links was for a pre-test through SurveyMonkey. We just ask that you complete that so we can learn a little bit more about who's in the room today. The other 2 links in the email you received provide you access to the Mantram Facilitator's Guide and Participant Manual. And we'll go into more detail about what these documents are going to be used for, but feel free to kind of follow along those as we move through this webinar. And if you didn't receive those links, I will put the links in the chat box for you to access those now. If you have any questions or technical issues during the presentation, just please let me know in the chat box or Q&A box. I'll be monitoring both of those throughout the presentation, and we'll take questions for our presenters at the end of today's session. And now, without further ado, I'll pass it off to our Mantram expert, Dr. Jill Bormann.
All right, well, let me get started with what Mantram repetition. I'm going to get into some of the details, but first of all, it's based on a philosophy that human beings have a mind, a body, and a spirit. So what makes Mantram repetition a little bit more unique, in my opinion, is that we really embrace a person's spirituality, spiritual well-being. And so the philosophy is that we believe that every one of us has a mind, a body, and deep inside within us, a spirit, and that spirit has these inner resources, things like joy and compassion and calmness and joy and passion. So those are the things that by using a mantra can help us quiet the mind and tap into those resources. Okay, next slide. The program comes from Eknath Easwaran. It's a mouthful to say, but Eknath Easwaran was a spiritual teacher of passage meditation. He had an 8-point program, and of the 8 points, we drew out 3 of those 8 points: mantram, slowing down, and one-pointed attention, because we found that those were the most readily accessible for most people. Next slide. So let's talk about mantram. That word is sometimes foreign to most people. We usually hear the word mantra. Both mantram and mantra come from the Sanskrit term manas try, meaning to cross the mind. So these are words or phrases that are seen as able to protect and keep us safe in a way. So a mantram in this program is a spiritual word or a phrase. Sometimes people call it a prayer word or holy name, but we use it to train attention. We use it because it helps you improve concentration. And as I said, it can help calm your mind and body. So what a mantram is not, and this is where a lot of people get confused, is that it's not an affirmation. An affirmation is like, I am lovable and capable, or I can do this. It's not a motto, you know, like Nike, just do it. Or a slogan, something that you quick and say to yourself, you know, I can do this. Life will get better, or something like that. And it's not just positive self-talk. A mantram is really kind of in a category by itself. And we use the word mantram instead of mantra to make a distinction from other types of mantra-based practices. Okay, next slide. So these are some examples, and I want to just say these are not all of the mantrams there are many more, but you'll notice on the left-hand side, Om Mani Padme Hum, for example, is a Buddhist mantra. And for those of us who speak English, those words really don't have any meaning. And sometimes that's good to choose a mantra that doesn't already have some associations. On the other hand, you may have a faith-based, you know, these are all based on different spiritual traditions. And so my God and my all, Saint Francis. You'll notice there's Christian, Jesus, Jesus, Hail Mary. Rama, I really want to highlight that one because Rama was Mahatma Gandhi's. And we always say, well, if it's good enough for Gandhi, it's good enough for me. But the word Rama is really an invocation for joy. And when a person is repeating Rama to themselves, it's not like you repeat Rama, Rama, and then try to think, okay, joy, I want to feel joy. It's just merely concentrating on that word and repeating it, you know, over and over. And a couple more there's some Hindu ones, and shalom, meaning peace in Judaism. So each of these words, you have to look at them, and we'll talk about that, how to choose one that is best for you. So one thing that a lot of people, when they hear the word mantram, it can be a turnoff. People think it's Eastern, they think it's like, you know, mysticism, or it's going to brainwash me. And so I really want to be clear that it's really not. It's very simple, and it's not dogmatic. We're not going to tell you what to do. Of all the research we've done and all the different populations, we've never had a tragic event. We've never had anybody that has a side effect that is dangerous. Mantram is something you do quietly and silently to yourself. So it's not something, oftentimes people think of chanting. And I never call mantram repetition mantram chanting, because it's really personal and you do it all by yourself. It's not cult. We're not brainwashing anybody. It's not pagan or anti-Christian. I had one woman who came to class, and when she saw these words, and many of them were non-Christian, she said, that's it. I'm out of here. That doesn't work for me. And that might be true for some of you. I mean, you might look at this and say, I can't buy this. I can't go with this. So we just want you to know that that's fine. If it works for you and you want to try it, that's great. And that's hopefully what you'll do with this program, is set your skepticism aside and give it a chance. And it's not transcendental meditation. Maybe some of you, depending on your age, know what TM is. A transcendental meditation is a sitting practice with your eyes closed, and you're assigned a mantra. We're not talking about nonsensical syllables, and oftentimes people think, oh, this kind of thing is just for hippies, or like when you go back to the Beatles or whatever, people kind of poo-poo Mantram repetition. But it's really not any of those things. So let's go to the next slide. So how to choose one. Now let me preface this by saying, ultimately, we want you to choose one and to use it for the rest of your life. Now that's a heavy burden. Some people think, oh no, if I got to choose one, I want to make sure it's the right one, and oh dear, and they'll, postpone. But that doesn't mean you can't practice a couple different ones to see kind of what fits for you and what works for you. But we do ask that you pick a traditional mantram. So for example, instead of choosing the word peace or calm, we would recommend choosing Om Shanti or Shalom, which means peace. We don't want you to have other associations. Like if I were to choose peace, then I think of the dove with the olive branch, or I think of the peace sign, or those kind of things. You want to pick something that's kind of pure that you can repeat without associations. Obviously, you want it to be compatible with whatever belief system you have. And sometimes people just look at the list and they'll just see one that pops right out and they'll just use that. You want to avoid anything with negative associations. And you can choose one and just try it out for a few days or weeks. And you may find after a while that you can't change it because it's already kind of picked you. So let me give you 2 quick stories of people who have been in my classes and who have chosen their mantrams. So the first time I was teaching at the VA, and you can imagine I got all these veterans, had one guy way in the back of the room in a wheelchair. And I'm up there, and this was the first class, and I'm introducing it, telling them about these mantrams and how to choose a mantram and so forth. And I kind of looked at this guy and I thought he was sleeping. I thought he missed the whole point of the class. I just didn't even know. But afterwards, he comes up to me in his wheelchair and he looks right at me and he says, I know what my mantram is. And he reaches into his billfold and he pulls it out and he has a prayer of St. Francis. So he chose my God and my all. That was his mantram, and it was no doubt that's just fit for him. I've had other people choose a mantram and go with Om Mani Padme Hum because they thought that was good and they're going to try that, and they couldn't remember it. They just kept thinking, I want that one, but I can't remember it. So we asked them to write it down, to write it over and over and over until they really got it in their minds. And then there's a third kind of person who will choose a mantram, begin to use it, and say, I don't like that one. I'm going to switch. And then when they go to switch, they find that they keep saying the old one, the first one. So just as there's differences for all of us, each person is unique, there's going to be a unique way for you to choose the mantram that works for you. Next slide. So when we say use your mantram, it's very simple. All we mean is quietly and with your eyes open or shut, but to quietly in your mind repeat your mantram, Rama, Rama, Rama. And you can say it fast, you can say it slow. The idea is you want to train your attention on that word or phrase over and over again, as many times as you can throughout the day. But now here's what happens. When you first pick a mantram, like in my case, Maranatha, And I would be repeating Maranatha, Maranatha, and then all of a sudden my mind would go, oh gosh, did I turn the oven off this morning after I baked my omelet? Oh dear, I better check. Or Maranatha, Maranatha, Maranatha. Oh, it's my nephew's birthday. I need to take care of my nephew's birthday. And then when you notice you've slipped away, it's very simple. You just bring it right back. You know, you need to take care of the thing at hand, whatever it is you need to deal with, like if you need to make a list. But as soon as you're finished, you can bring your mind back to the mantra. So what it can do is it can tune out all the chatter and the worries of the future, as well as tunes out all the regrets and the whatever in the past. So a mantra can bring you right into the present moment, even if you just repeat it a couple of times. And the idea with making mantra a part of your life, and why we call it a portable, practical type of intervention, is that you really can do it all day long in these little snippets of time. You know, you're driving the car and you stop at the stoplight and you're sitting there. And of course, our usual thinking is, oh gosh, am I going to be late? Or, oh, this idiot pulled out in front of me. Or, oh, you know, we usually just go into this whole dialogue. And at that time, it's just to say your mantra. Just chill out and just relax and just repeat it over and over and over. And you'll find that the more you repeat it, the easier it is to remember it, and the more rapidly it will come into your attention. Because, you know, frankly, there's a lot of things our minds are doing that really aren't helpful. Worry, rumination, fear, anxiety, and those things are not helpful. So the idea with mantra is to train attention onto just this little word or phrase to give your mind a respite. So I like to think of it as a screensaver for the mind. When you're not thinking and concentrating and doing something, you revert to your mantra and it just gives you a little break. So initially, we want you to integrate it into daily routines, and we'll give you some tips about that. And you can use it when you're dealing with hard situations, like before giving somebody difficult news and you need to calm yourself down. Or use it if you're having pain or someone else is having pain, teach them to use it. Use it when they're prepared for surgery or a procedure. It's a great time. I always use my mantra when I see the dentist. I just go in there, and sometimes I do it ahead of time. That's the thing. Mantra can be prophylactic. You know, you can start saying your mantra before you get into that difficult situation, and then you're calmed down when you're dealing with that. So let's go to the next slide. So let me just briefly say there are many benefits. And, you know, I've been an expert of mantra and I've used it in my own life for probably over 30 years. I've seen what it can do for other people, which is why I get so excited about it. And I think everybody should have a mantra. I'm like, why not? But we've actually done research studies. And we have found in healthcare providers and peer supports, we've done studies in nursing students and other VA employees, and have shown that yes, Mantram repetition can help reduce workplace stress and anxiety and anger. It can help people feel better and have better positive coping, spiritual well-being. And we've done studies with veterans and post-traumatic stress disorder, and we find that Mantram helps improve levels of mindfulness, which then in turn can decrease levels of PTSD symptoms and burnout. It can reduce burnout and especially hyperarousal. I think that the number one positive outcome with veterans that have post-traumatic stress is it reduces their hyperarousal as well as insomnia. It's a great sleeping pill, if you will. And so for military caregivers, those of you that are taking care of anybody else, you know that you have many things on your plate, many things that you're juggling. And we have found with caregivers of veterans with dementia, for example, that they have reduced levels of caregiver burden, they've reduced levels of depression and anxiety and so forth. So we do encourage you to try this and give it a chance and see if it can help you and your caregivers you're working with. In this slide, it sort of gives an example, a conceptualization of having a stressful event, which then triggers the fight or flight response. And if that is continued, we live with, chronic stress. And I think right now with COVID, living with the pandemic, living with many stressors every day, we're operating at a low level of chronic stress. So the idea with Mantram repetition is that in order to interrupt that stress response, using a mantram can actually do that. So in the lower part of this slide, we say a stressful event and then use your mantram. And you'll see that we've interjected mantram in here right between the event and the response, when in fact, as I said earlier, you could be using mantram all the time like a prophylactic kind of response. And some of you may think, well, I already take a deep breath. I use breathing all day and I take a deep breath and that's how I calm down. Or I would imagine many of you are doing already some types of mindfulness practices. I think mantram's different in that when you repeat the word or phrase, as opposed to looking around and being mindful, it serves as a transition of your attention. So then you can then turn your attention to other things and be mindful. So it's training the mechanism in your mind back to that same word over and over again. And when you do that, it's like lifting weights. And that's why practice it as much as you can. Okay, the next slide. All right, making it work. As with most things, changing a behavior is difficult. I was reading about habits. And I think of mantram, that you want to really make mantram a habit. And people used to say, 21 days, if you do something for 21 days, it's a habit. Well, according to habit researchers, it takes 66 days on average to create a habit. And I frankly think that's probably more realistic. So once you've chosen a mantram, you need to find ways to remind yourself to repeat it. And putting up sticky notes around the house is a great way. Putting something on your driver's seat. We had a social worker one time, and she was always in a hurry. And she would get in the car and put on her seatbelt, and off she'd go, and she'd get tickets for speeding. And so she decided she needed to slow down. And so she just made a point that whenever she put her seatbelt on in the car, she'd pause for 2 seconds and repeat her mantra. And that was enough to interrupt that bad habit of automatic pilot, Also before sleep. And I guess for those of you that are novices, you've never heard this before, you've never done this before, then repeating your mantra every night as you're falling asleep is so important, because then what you're doing is you're making a connection between the mind and your body's relaxing. And that's, that mind-body connection, so that if every night you repeat your mantra and you fall asleep, then later during the day when you're stressed and you use mantra, that mind-body connection can help you relax. The other thing is that instead of counting sheep, they always say count sheep, or whatever, you just repeat your mantra. And obviously over time, your mind's kind of going to get bored with it, right? You'll fall asleep. And many of our veterans say they've used it to help them with nightmares and other types of things. You can also track your practice. We did that with our research studies, where at the end of the day, you kind of estimate about how many sessions, how many times did I remember a mantra. I would set my timer on my phone. I've been doing that a lot lately to remind myself during the day of various activities or things that I want to do. For example, this morning, I set my alarm before this webinar so that I would be ready and not miss it. But similarly, you could set on your phone little alarms at various times throughout the day as just a wake-up call, like, oh, okay, I can repeat my mantra. And then just repeat it 3 or 4 or 5 times, and then you can be on your way. Also, routine activities, like brushing your teeth in the morning, when you're making your coffee. We ask people to pick things in their lives that they do every day. For me, just walking just anytime I get up and I'm walking from my house to the car, or I'm walking anywhere, my mantra will just come to me because I've practiced it so much. So you want to make it a habit. All right, next slide. So we're going to practice right now. And I'm actually going to use my phone timer for this. But choose a list. Choose a mantra from the list. And if you can't remember from that, or you don't have your facilitator guide right now, let's just choose Rama as a mantra for this exercise. And right now, we're going to give ourselves about a minute or two to sit quietly and try to repeat that word over and over again for a period of time. And the purpose of this is to really just pay attention to your thoughts and to see if you can actually do that. So I'm going to reach down here and I'm going to check my little timer, and I'll set this for 2 minutes. And then I've got my toner, and I'll ring my little bell when we're ready. So when we're ready to come back together as a group, you'll hear a tone like that. All right, and if you want to, you can close your eyes. Might be a good time to take a little break. Okay, ready? Let's go. All right. Now, I imagine that for many of you, or at least even for me, sometimes it's hard to bring my mind back because I'm thinking about all the other things I got to do. And it may feel difficult to do that at first. But once you've really used your mantra, you'll find that it is a break. It's like time out, and you can calm yourself. So the purpose of this exercise is not to necessarily encourage you to use your mantra sitting quietly with your eyes closed, but for you to see how your mind is. So speed it up. It's the monkey mind. And so we want you to be able to use mantra any place you go, and use it on the run, so to speak. Okay, next. All right. What's the difference between mantra and mindfulness or meditation? All right, well, one thing I have learned after being involved in this work for 20 plus years is that any kind of mindfulness or meditation or deep breathing or relaxation, the one common denominator is attention, being able to focus attention. So in terms of mindfulness, there's ways that people do body scans, or they do yoga, or there's something they call open monitoring mindfulness, which means you kind of just notice, I'm walking, like walking meditation. I notice what's in my environment. I notice my thoughts and so forth. It's a noticing kind of thing. Similarly with meditation, it's usually concentrating on something. And so mantram is similar in that way because you're training your attention. And it's different because the words that we're training our attention to are spiritual words or phrases that we believe have a deeper meaning, or they have an effect upon us. So, and again, don't take my word for it. You have to do it to believe it. You have to try it to believe it for yourselves.
So Jill, can I ask you a quick question about this one?
Yeah.
So this is something that when I started learning about Mantram and with you, I had also been doing a mindfulness meditation practice, loving kindness meditation practice that I've been sitting for a while, and that was a kind of something that I had been working on. And I really, when I started working with you, got worried that if I do that and then I add Mantram to it, somehow those things aren't going to be compatible, or I should choose one. Can you address that a little bit? Because for me, that was a little bit of a barrier, that like, I don't need Mantram maybe because I'm already doing mindfulness and I don't see the difference, or maybe I'm cheating on meditation practice somehow. I had worries about that. Mm-hmm.
It's a great question. And
Yeah.
I've gotten that question. Yeah. I've gotten that question before.
Yeah.
What I always say is Mantram is one little tool, and you can add it to whatever you're already doing. And for some people, like I have a sitting meditation also, where I sit quietly for my 30 minutes every day. But that's very different than using Mantram on the run, so to speak. And so I think that you can add to whatever else you're doing. Now, for some people, like say deep breathing, they use, I'm just going to take some deep breaths now. I'm just going to calm down, take some deep breaths. You can continue doing that and then add the Mantram if you want. Whatever it is you're already doing for stress management or mindfulness or whatever, like when you do yoga and you're practicing yoga poses, that's a good time to kind of use the Mantram and add Mantram. So I don't think that they're not counterintuitive, that's not the right word, but if they're not, if you can't
compatible.
Compatible, yeah. I would say they are compatible. And I would say don't replace something that's already working well for you. You know, don't replace Mantram with something that you're already doing that's working really well.
Okay.
Add it when you're not doing those things.
Right. No, and I guess it's true. I mean, one of the ways that I eventually ended up, and we've talked about this before, I tended to not, you know, I don't do meditation practice when I'm driving, for example, but I can use my Mantram when I drive, which is often really helpful, especially if I get cut off and then I start getting angry because I'm thinking, what a jerk, they must think they're more important than I am. And so, and I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist, so there may be other folks on the call who subscribe to that a little bit. And sometimes for me, it's really hard to challenge my thinking in the moment. And so Mantram has helped me notice my thinking and then just shut it off a little bit, because if I do the Mantram, it's really hard for me to do the Mantram and have negative distorted cognitions. Right. And then I can do the challenging later when I've parked, for example. Right.
Well, what you just described is really what a Mantram can do at first, and that's raise your attention of what am I thinking. Mm-hmm. It's like a metacognition,
right?
Thinking about thinking. So, you know, you say, okay, I'm going to repeat my Mantram now, and then you notice you're not. You notice you're just doing all other kind of things. When you repeat your Mantram, it requires attention and an effort. And just by repeating it, it just helps you recognize that you're thinking of other things.
Right, which has been really helpful for me as a person. It also helped me a lot when I was doing treatment, when I was doing therapy with folks, or even working with caregivers who would sometimes come in with the veterans they were caring for. And it's just stressful and hard. And sometimes they would kind of spin a little bit in their thoughts, and that drives your mood, right? And so having them at least stop that with something else for their head to do was helpful.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if there are folks on the call who or on the webinar who have any experience with that or questions about implementing this with some of the folks you're working with, but we'd love to hear that too.
Yeah, are there other questions? Or should we go to the next one? Let's see. Common challenges with practicing. Well, like I say, probably the biggest challenge. Well, first of all, there's a challenge of getting used to the word Mantram. And that can be, like I say, a turnoff to some people. We can just call it a rapid focus tool. That's what it is. It's a word or phrase to help you rapidly focus attention. So you can call it a rapid focus tool. Some people call it a prayer word if they're not if they don't have an aversion to religious language, so to speak. Stress buster. We called it a portable stress buster because it's a way to interrupt, that stress response. But I think the biggest challenge is just remembering to do it and making a point, making an effort to practice it all as much as you can. What are some other questions?
So this is a good one that we came up with, Jill, as we were talking about what should people expect their experience to be like when they start using this tool. And for everybody, I can tell you, I was frustrated a little bit when I started because I noticed that I would, first of all, I'm one of those people that changed after I tried out a mantra for a little bit, and it was like a craze. And I kept mispronouncing it in my head, and then I would get frustrated with myself because I was mispronouncing it. And so then I just went back to Rama, which I've kept for, now that's my mantra. But I found myself getting distracted by, am I pronouncing this right? Or am I doing this right? Or I get mad at myself for forgetting to do it. So I don't know if those are common things you've heard from people.
Yeah.
But that was my experience for a while, was that it was a little bit frustrating.
Well, I always think, and I've heard this said before, that we have a committee living in our head. We have a committee of voices living in our head that are telling us what to do. We have our kind voices, we have our compassionate voices, we have the critic, we have the doubt, the self-doubt. We have all these things going on in our head. And when a person first starts with this mantra thing, I expect a lot of skepticism, and there might be some reluctance to even try it. And so I always say, well, put your skepticism aside and then just go with it. And like you did, Carrie, initially you might be saying, Rama, Rama, boy, this is stupid. I can't imagine how this can help me. Rama, 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 well, I guess I'll try it. But I really don't like it. Rama, Rama, I really need other things. I'm wasting my time. I don't really want to do that right now. Rama, 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 Rama.
Right. Yeah, that was it.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's almost, it's sort of like Rama, Rama, if anybody knew I was doing this, what would they think of me? So there's a kind of a inner self-consciousness about it, but it's over time, and I can only say this from my experience, your mantra can become like an old friend. Your mantra it's just a solace that it can become that, but it's going to take time and practice. And so we always say there are 3 phases of practice. And that first phase is exactly what you're talking about, Carrie. It's mechanical. It's boring. It doesn't do anything. I'm just saying, Rama, Rama, I don't notice any difference. I don't feel any different. I'm not going to do this anymore. Well, that's your biggest mistake, is you gave up too soon. By repeating it and repeating it, it's mechanical and it's boring and it's all these things. But if you keep doing it, there'll come a time, and I can guarantee this, that you will notice that you're reacting and responding to stress differently. And I call that the aha stage, like the experiential, like, oh, I didn't lose my temper.
Right.
Or, oh, there's just a little pause time. And I think you're rewiring neurons in the brain, and that's kind of how that works. The other thing about that is that eventually we want you to move from that aha phase to having many more moments of aha, oh, I see how this works, and so forth, into habitual.
Right. So you're not even thinking about it anymore.
Right. You're not even thinking about it anymore. Yeah. So I wouldn't look for like feelings like I'm going to start levitating now, or immediately I'm going to start feeling fabulous now. It's not a quick fix. You have to think of it as training and lifting weights. And when I go to the gym and lift weights, I don't notice any improvement in my arm until I've done weights for many, many weeks and many, many months. And it may take many, many weeks for a person to actually feel a response.
Right. I remember actually, Jill, I remember the workshop I was in when I first started practicing Mantram, and you were teaching, and I was in there with a bunch of VA staff and providers, actually. It was a long time ago. And one of the women is sitting at a table in front of me. We had the 2-day workshop, and we all picked a Mantram and we worked on it. And she went home, and I remember being really like frustrated because she came back in the next day and said, I tried that when I was going to sleep and it worked so great. And I remember thinking, oh, it didn't work for me. So I imagine there's kind of a continuum of how long those 3 phases take people to get to. Some people get in shape a little bit more quickly than other people. It took me quite a bit longer than my colleague at that point to have it help me with sleep or have it be a real pause.
Exactly.
But I would imagine some people are quicker. It just works better for them more quickly.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's like a miracle. And I almost don't believe that. I've had veterans come into a class and a week later they say it helped me sleep. Just boom, like that. And I'm like, it's almost like it's too good to be true. But for other people, it takes a much, much longer, period of time. So those of you on this call and those of you that are deciding, okay, I think I'll try this, I would really encourage you to make an effort, a concerted effort to use it every single day. And then when we come back in our next seminar, we'll be talking about how Mantram can help with slowing down and being one-pointed, and that can take care of a multitude of issues, stress-related as well as making mistakes and things like that. What else do we have? Well, we mentioned already about if you have a client or a person that doesn't like the word Mantram, really the real reason we use the word Mantram is because it takes you back to the originator, Eknath Easwaran. So when you type it in and you Google it, it'll take you to that. It'll take you to my research. It'll take you to this program that we're talking about, as opposed to all the other types of mantra kinds of things. So you can call it anything you want. That's fine. But that's the reason that we called it Mantram.
And Jill, we have a couple questions from Seward is wondering, does studying and understanding the philosophical underpinnings of a traditional mantram add to the long-term value of its use? For example, to recite Buddhist mantram, Seward, I can't pronounce that, Namoy Reggie Ho, so I just made that was not a nightmare, means to respect the unlimited abilities of each human being as Buddhas in their own right. So does knowing that change the value of the mantra, I think is what Seward's asking.
All right. Well, Easwaran would say, you don't even need to know the meaning of the word to have an effect. In other words, it's the repetition and the vibration and all that kind of thing that will have an effect upon you, whether you cognitively, mentally know what it's all about or not. However, that being said, some people have to know. They're not going to do something nonsensical or something that they don't know anything about. So yeah, for some people, it might be important for them, and that's up to each individual, to learn, to look up the mantram, to read about it. Where did it, come from? What's the story behind it? So I think that's really up to the individual. And, you may want to encourage them to do that.
But that's not been, if I remember correctly, a piece of the research. You've done a lot of research. And I got to participate in some of that as a co-investigator, and that wasn't a piece that we ever looked at, or in fact had people do, and the mantram still had statistically and clinically significant impacts on caregivers, military and veteran caregivers, as well as military veterans and healthcare providers who work with veterans. Yeah. So it would be interesting, Seward, to see. You said you've met students who insist on knowing. When your preference is to teach them to learn to have it first. So Jill was just kind of talking about, people are different. One of the things I've loved about Mantram and using it with my patients, as well as some personal experience with it, has been, it's so flexible. I've done many treatment protocols in my life, and I'm a fan, for sure, of evidence-based practice. The protocols are pretty rigid, may not be the right word, but Mantram is not that at all. So I've really enjoyed that. Amanda's wondering about specific breathing directions while using the Mantram. Are there any?
There really are not any specific breathing instructions, but people will find that they will automatically, use the rhythm of their breathing, or if you're walking or exercising, we often use the rhythm. I have a friend that swims, and so when she's swimming, she's she's taking strokes and doing Rama, Rama, that kind of thing. Again, it's very unique to each person, but there really are that's what makes it so simple. It's, you don't have to tie it to your breath, and you don't have to tie it to an app or to anything else around you.
Okay. And Howard Davis is asking, so he has questions. And yes, Howard, absolutely, you are welcome to hold them until the last session, but you're welcome to ask them now. He is a martial artist and priest, and he says that he has questions about doing these more static meditations versus the moving meditations, which they use under stress in martial arts. And have you considered research in the area or in the arena, and do you know any research about movement with this versus a static mantra, which you can do, obviously without.
Well, yeah. What Eshwin recommends, and that's often used, is using mantram with a brisk walking. And he talks about if you're really angry and you're pissed off and you want to discharge some of that, then go for what he calls a mantram walk. Take a mantram walk and walk along, or anytime you're exercising. We had a Marine that had to run up a hill and he could never make it to the top. And so he decided to use his mantram. And so he came back after using his mantram, and he was able to use the mantram to get him up the hill. So from that standpoint, again, it's very flexible. And no, I don't know of any research really in that area.
So Howard was just saying he was thinking about movement. So you just addressed this, such as yoga, but or not necessarily yoga, but movement under stress, like sword practice. So running up a hill so it sounds like you can play with it and see if it's compatible, if it's helpful. Great, Howard, thanks.
Yeah. Great. Any other questions?
Sonia Hamilton, for folks who are on, Sonia just shared a free COVID-19 resource. And Sonia, we can send that out when we send out some of the other materials. Thank you so much for putting that in the QA. Free and local resources are helpful, and we would love to share those with the people who are participating.
Mm-hmm.
Seward asked another question. Has research been done on group recitation of mantram? And Jill, you talked a little bit about this earlier, but do you want to?
There's been no research on it that I know of. And when you say group recitation, Mantram repetition, we don't talk about group reciting. This is not done. It's just completely, we don't even do that. And I'm not saying that group chanting isn't wonderful. And people sing mantrams and they do group chanting and all that kind of thing. And those things are wonderful. And there is a rhythm and all that. But that's not mantram. That's not what we're talking about.
That's not this tool that you're talking about. This tool is a different technique. Maybe not necessarily better or worse, but just different.
Just different. That's right. And we've not done any research on that kind of thing.
Jenna, I know we wanted to show folks, make sure that people had the next session in their calendars, and I think you had some post questions you wanted to ask. Folks, please feel free if you have questions throughout the week to send them to us. Jenna, you can, I don't know if you want those to go to you. I think we have a mantram@psycharmor.org email set up, but I'll let you close out, Jenna.
Yeah, thank you, Carrie and Jill. So yeah, our next session is next Monday, November 23rd at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, 2 p.m. Eastern. And this session will be focused on one-pointed attention and slowing down for mantram.
And I'll just put in a plug. We just got a paper published on mantram for COVID-19, which we'll send the link out to everybody.
Definitely. Yeah, I will. Apologies for the link not working to the facilitator's guide and participant manual. I'll look into that and send out an email very soon after this. And it'll come from mantram@psycharmor.org. If you have any questions, comments, feedback for our presenters today, feel free to email us there. Like I said at the beginning of the presentation, I'm your first point of contact for this whole webinar series, so I will be the one answering those emails. And if needed, pass it on to Jill and Carrie. And you can also always call our support center at 844-779-2427. Again, thank you everyone for attending today. Thank you, Carrie and Jill, for an awesome presentation and Q&A session. And happy Monday, and we'll see you next week.